start. And thank you all for being here. So I am going to start by sharing my screen. And I don't know if you all had a chance. Actually, what I'm going to do is share the agenda in the chat. So this is what Darren put together yesterday, which is both the agenda and notes from last week. Thank you, Darren. So we're going to start. Let's do this. Can you all see my screen? Doesn't look like it.
Yes.
You can?
Yes.
All right. So I wanted to just start by going back to the meeting agreements quickly. And you may notice that one of them has changed. So let me just put this on. Hold on one sec, sorry. So now I can't see you all. And I don't like that.
So Emily, my view of your screen has sort of a WebEx in WebEx, so I can see Zachary's face right now, and then a white block behind it.
And not my
right. And now I see myself, which is comforting.
That is annoying.
So
right. You know what I'm gonna do? Wait.
When you clicked on share screen, it asks you
share my meeting window, which that is not what I want to do.
That is not what you want to do.
And this is what happened last time, John Paul. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm sorry. I don't think it gives me the option to share. It really just gives me the option to do this weird thing. So I'm going to stop that. Stop sharing. I'll figure this out one day when we're not on the clock. I'm going to actually send this to you, John Paul, okay? And while we're doing that, why don't we just go to the shared document, and I'll put that in the chat. Okay. All right. So while I am sending this to John Paul, Zachary, why don't you just read the 3 shared agreements, and then if anybody has any questions about like what this would look like, we can talk about that now, and then I will share a little bit about why we changed the second one. But maybe go to that shared Google Doc to start with.
Okay. 1 second. So to the agenda, right?
Not the agenda, the second one that I sent, which is the
Okay, clicking it again.
Google Doc with all of the.
I think the links are the same, Emily.
Yeah, it's sending me back to the agenda.
Off to a great start. We're going to end better than we started. So
No, it's okay.
Hold on one second.
It's all good.
All right, here we go. I think sometimes doing my like yoga in the morning makes me more present, and sometimes it makes me, I guess, puts me somewhere else. So today might be one of those days. Bear with me.
Got it. Got it.
Okay. Did that work?
Yep. So our 3 meeting agreements are invite and value different ideas and perspectives, assume positive intent, but name impact, and take a stance of curiosity.
Yeah, so I will just say quickly that Jessica and I chatted a little bit about the, after the last meeting, about the giving one another the benefit of the doubt, because it had brought up sort of some conversation. And one of the things that is really important, I think, with meeting agreements is that we agree on them. Otherwise, they're sort of meaningless. And during the social studies meeting, the advisory committee meeting, first advisory committee meeting, I heard Jessica use this one, the second one, which I think really gets at the same idea, but I think it's actually a little more, it invites sort of speaking back to things that don't land well with any of us, right? Like if somebody says something and you're like, huh. So, so that's sort of the rationale behind that change. And I guess I just was wondering if these make sense to folks, if you feel like these are good agreements, and if there's anything there that you're like, what would that even look like? Like, I sort of get it, but I'm not sure I would be able to act on it.
So I'll jump in, Emily. This is Jess. I appreciate that change. And I had shared when Emily reached out that I can't take credit for it. It was a norm that came up in working with a client. A grantee, one of the nonprofits that we were working with, basically said this is something they use because it has that same spirit of presume that everyone you're working with is approaching this with a positive intent. But if something lands badly, or it lands in a way that is hurtful, speak up, because that's how the group is going to continue to work and evolve in an honest fashion. So I really appreciate that shift, and these sit very well for me, and I think they're aligned with some of the things we're trying to accomplish. So I'm good with them. Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else? Okay. All right. So these are our agreements. And then I wanted to, why is nothing easy today? Now I can't find my PowerPoint. See, the PowerPoint was supposed to make this go more smoothly for me today. I think this is a lesson in itself.
It's totally fine.
I hate PowerPoints, actually.
My middle school band teacher gave me great advice. You don't have to speak to the mistake, because oftentimes people may not even pick up that they may not even notice that it wasn't meant to be that way.
That's true. You guys, I'm just really giving you time to be, it's Friday, right?
A lot of grace, a lot of grace.
Thank you. Jesus Christ. All right. So I did, based on our conversation last week, I did make changes to the definition. And I tried to incorporate pretty much everything everyone said. So Ruth, we haven't heard from you yet. Will you read the new or the revised version? Are you there, Ruth?
Oh, I am. Do you not hear me?
Still don't hear you. All right. How about Simone? Do you want to read them? Hi, Simone. By the way, welcome, Simone. I know we met you, I think, once, but thank you for your help. I don't think I thanked you while everyone was here. But do you want to read the new definition?
I can. Sure, absolutely.
Oh, this one.
For research and support purposes, the committee defines WRE as student access to balanced course offerings and experiences across disciplines, including ample time for humanities, science, art, PE, as well as math and literacy. A well-rounded education involves real-world learning and culturally relevant content, and provides students with the social emotional support they need to thrive in school and beyond.
Thank you. Um,
Thank you.
so one of the things that
Can anybody hear me?
now we can hear you, Ruth. Do you have something to say?
I missed my star turn. I'm done.
Well done. As you can see, I really like the idea of including balance and talking about well-rounded education being about a balanced course offering or a balanced education. And that it's not excluding literacy and math was something you all talked about. And that, it should include application is a really important part of it. And one of the reasons why I felt like it was both important to revise this and also maybe a good time, now that we are shifting our focuses. Because to be honest, when we were on, sort of on track with the research, I never felt quite satisfied with it, and I've been trying to put my finger on what it is. And I think part of it was that we weren't really getting at well-rounded education through that research. It was really focused on the time that we spent doing, certain, or that schools spent on certain subjects or subjects that were labeled as such. We didn't even know what it would be, what was involved once we were done. So I think part of what I'm hoping we can do today, now that we've sort of talked about norms and we've talked about the meaning of well-rounded education, I want us to get to a point by the end of this meeting where we either have decided we are at the end of this work, like we know what we're going to do to wrap it up by whenever we decide it makes sense to wrap it up, or maybe this is the beginning of sort of doing something more meaningful than the original research that we were planning to do. Because honestly, I don't know if, and we can talk about whether it was worth investing in before, sort of just finding out time spent on certain subjects. But my sense is that it doesn't really get us much. So actually, John Paul, can we go to the slides? Yeah, Ruth. Oh no, now I can't hear you again. Ruth, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so you may have talked about this while I was off. On my screen, there's sort of under the definition, there's 4 lines that are highlighted, and then building background knowledge is separate. Is that?
Thank you for right. So I don't know if you remember in our conversation last time, I wasn't sure about including background knowledge, and so I didn't. So everything that's highlighted, I put in there. The reason I didn't put background knowledge is because I think it's important. I think it's important in the context that you talked about it in, which is literacy. And I do think that when we're talking about well-rounded education, that it's almost, it's what becomes problematic almost, in that I think that what's important about well-rounded education to me is that it's what gives students the opportunity to find what they are interested in, and part of that self-actualization piece, right, that Dr. Simmons talked about. It's also, I see it as, and this is why the balance piece is important. It's the connective tissue between, hopefully, if it's done well, it's what gives all the subjects its meaning, right? Like if schools are teaching in a way that is holistic and helps students to see the connection both between subjects, why they're relevant to each other, and between subjects and real world learning applicability, then I think that they are achieving a well-rounded education. So basically, it's what gives learning that kids are doing in school meaning, right? So I guess the background knowledge piece is maybe more of, it's a difference between using it as a vehicle to teach literacy and seeing the value in doing this, teaching or having a well-rounded education as part of your school culture. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. Here would be my response on it, which is, I think I agree with everything you said. I think at some level, they're almost two different things, or the background knowledge is a subset of the well-rounded education. Originally, this committee, I forget what the name was, but it talked about well-rounded curriculum, and it has expanded to include everything you're talking about, which I think is good. I personally would not want to lose the idea of the well-rounded curriculum, because I think creating the balance across these subjects is important. And what I would say about the building background knowledge is, I guess it can be seen as a vehicle for building literacy, but I think the way I think about it, it's a vehicle, it's that it's an understanding of the world that is necessary in order to be able to comprehend reading or civic life or anything. And so I would hate to lose it. I mean, I would hate to lose it as a subset of this that we pay special attention to, but certainly understand that everybody doesn't want it to be the only thing.
Right. And I think as long as it's clear that it's not, maybe it's that it's become jargony and it's become sort of, it's become associated with the reason we learn social studies is to improve reading, and I am opposed to that.
No, I am sympathetic to that. I mean, I used to talk about sort of a rich, balanced curriculum. I mean, I think I don't disagree with you on that. The term has developed some baggage. But
so I guess my question is, do we capture the idea of that in our definition? You know what I mean? That it's important to have a balanced, offerings for the reasons you're saying. Do we need to put the term background knowledge in there? Or do we? Yeah.
I'm willing to take a stab at this after this meeting so that we don't have to spend a lot of time, if that's helpful. I think what the current definition misses is the idea of there is a body of content. We can all say it's this big or it's this big or it's, but there's some body of content that you want students to have. And I think that's not captured.
Like shared knowledge, you mean?
Yeah. And I think that's not really captured.
And I would just say that to the background knowledge piece, I definitely would advocate for including it somehow. But I would ask, why is well-rounded education important, or what is the end goal? I think that's missing here. So we kind of say what it is, but not so much why it's important.
Right, and I agree with that. So this is actually where it's going. This is where the slides were going. I agree, Zach. And I actually added something and then I took it away. And the reason is because it starts with the first part of that paragraph is for research and, what is it? No, I'm not looking at it. For research and support purposes. So this definition is to help us define it so that we know what we're doing when we're researching, right? Like, this is what we're talking about. And then when I I was going to put a sentence about, this is what gives learning meaning. this is, you know, about being able to take what you learn and apply it in, you know, multiple settings.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if that is part of a definition that helps us define our research, but maybe there's no reason to leave it off. I just, you know, was trying to keep it short and simple.
Gotcha.
But does that resonate with you in terms of what the purpose is?
Yeah, no, I think it does. And I would advocate for including it because I think it does give context, and it leaves, without it, I think it leaves open for interpretation why we're advocating for a well-rounded education, in my opinion.
Something like well-rounded education is what gives, well, John Paul, can you go to the slides? Because I think I have it there.
Or even in that first sentence, this committee defines it as a student access, blah, 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 including ample time for blah, 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 blah. And, well, that's a long sentence at that point. Or
Yeah,
something like, yeah, maybe we don't need to include it there. But I was going to say maybe, and that it's critical to ensure that students can apply their learning to the world around them or something.
Sure. Okay. All right. Well, so Ruth, do you want to take a stab at trying to put what you're thinking in there? And or no? Do you want me to do it? Do it
No,
too.
no, I will try. I'm not good at multitasking, so if I do this, I won't be
Well, you
listening.
don't have to do it. You don't have to do it now.
Oh, okay, yeah, I'm happy to do it after, and maybe I'll play around with it now.
Right.
But
And Zach, let me know if so. As we go on, you can go to the next slide, John Paul, if we sort of get at it, and then I can just put it in. So, having done that, sort of define what we're doing, I want to again go back to this question of what should the rest of our work look like? Are we beginning or are we concluding this work? And I just want to put in there that so if you're Jewish, I don't know if all Jewish people feel this way, but for me, I'll say as somebody who's always been in school, either as a student or as an educator, and as somebody who's Jewish, this is the end of my year. August really is sort of the end of the year, and the fall is the beginning of the year. That's our new year. And it makes a lot of sense. I'm kind of feeling this sense of like, this could be closure for this committee. Or we could be beginning in the fall, because I think this is our last meeting before September, if we want it to be. I mean, we can always meet in August, but I'm thinking of it like this is our last sort of formal meeting before school actually starts. So can you go to the next slide? Oh, so I guess it's sort of thinking, wait, no, I'm sorry, go back. This is why it's good to be able to control your own slides. That's fine. You know, why are we doing this work? Why are we doing it at this time when things are in complete upheaval? And so I guess it gets at the question of, we were just talking about, of why is well-rounded education important? And this is what I came up with, Zach, is that ultimately it makes learning meaningful and provides every individual with the opportunity for self-actualization. Should that be part of the statement?
Yeah, I don't know if I love that statement as much as the one you said a while ago, but yes, the sentiment.
All right. So something along those lines of why.
Yeah.
And so I guess this is what I'm proposing is, but if by the end of this meeting, we feel strongly that the SBOE and this committee has a role to play in advancing that vision, or that, you know, being able to add something around well-rounded education at this time, then I think we should go forward. If not, I think we should pick sort of a simple way to end. And I think we've talked about that already, so I'll get at sort of different options. So I think what I'm going to do now, and I'm sorry we didn't look at the agenda, we changed things around, is kind of look at what a product might be, like a, you know, what we're moving towards. And then, what's our time here? So I'm going to try to do this in the next half an hour. And then Zach is going to lead us through using the equity framework, regardless of what we decide, because we want to try to do that anyway, to apply to some of the choices we would make if we go in a certain direction, if that makes sense.
And if we go in a different direction, I'm fine. We can table that and maybe iron out what the future might look like, I'm thinking, and maybe
Right,
use the equity framework in that context.
Yeah, so in one way or another, what we're hoping to do is apply the equity framework in a way that feels meaningful and see how it works. And so part of the idea of that is actually to also see ways that we might tweak the equity framework, if that makes sense.
Yes.
But we'll get to that.
Emily,
Okay.
could I say, I think part of, as we are now about to engage in reflecting on our path forward, part of the tension to me seems, and this kind of connects to the conversation Ruth and I were having in the research committee, maybe there are different ways of thinking about the board's work via our authority. And so one of the limitations, and correct me if I'm wrong, I felt like maybe your vision for this committee was different than what we have authority over. And so therefore, maybe the research, you were feeling like, oh, well, let me do what's in our authority area or what we can get off with. And so I think as we figure out the path forward, it just may be worth us aligning on, should we shoot high and beyond just what we, and for what we believe and think is important, or should we stay within the confines of what the board has authority over, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's a combination of that and also obviously limited resources. We can't do a really in-depth, you know, observation-based research study in 150 schools, right? Like that would make it worthwhile, but we can. So it's just very limiting for both those reasons, I think.
Well, as in order to do that, you would have to have school buy-in, and without the authority to make people do it, you're kind of
Right.
at the mercy of whoever says, yes, I'll play with you.
Right. No, absolutely. And yeah, so I think it was very limited, and it was limited for those reasons. And I think I said this before, but nobody's sure what is going to happen going forward with schooling, but I think maybe we have an opportunity here to add value because of that.
Yep.
Because things are so uncertain and because people are feeling much more open right now. That might change too, but at the moment, stakeholders who I'm speaking to are like, you know, I am really rethinking what this should look like. And so that actually does really align with what we're talking about here, right? So that's why I'm feeling both. I guess I really want to emphasize for you all that I am ready to let this go, this baby go, or I'm willing to really like go whole hog if you are. Like I can put a lot of energy into it, but I want to feel like it's something that we're all excited about and feel like we are really going to provide something that is useful, right? And as Zach always says, that adds value.
I'm trying to be conscious of airtime, so I'm going to just throw out a suggestion and then I will let people to react to it. My recommendation, and I believe I shared this with Ruth, Marcus, Emily, John Paul, others on the call. I actually think the board we have a huge opportunity to lead during this time of COVID-19. And I would love this committee to sunset in its current form, maybe keeping the same members and move in that direction. And the connection I would make is understanding that we've been fortunate to receive research dollars. How can we take the work that we would do regarding COVID-19, whatever that looks like, and connect it to this well-rounded definition and context that we've been working on for the last year, so that we can then connect our research for the coming year, if I'm understanding what's afforded to us monetarily, along with being a value add to schools in the state during COVID. That would be my suggestion.
Wait, can you say that again, Zach?
Yeah, in short, I would sunset the Well-Rounded Education Committee, perhaps change the name to something COVID related, and figure out what is it that the committee would do to be a value add to schools, parents, teachers, the state during this time. Also, the second part of that is knowing that we have research dollars. I would advocate for us allotting a certain amount. I don't know if it would be the same value that we were going to do before, to some research and connecting the two, that like some COVID related research with a well-rounded education lens, to kind of take on the legacy of the work we've done this past year and marrying it with what our schools and city is dealing with now.
So framing it differently might help. That's true. Yeah. So that's a good point. And I hadn't thought of that. Like maybe the frame is limiting in itself. All right. Thank you, Zach. Anybody else have response to that or other thoughts before we move on?
I mean, I like that idea. I was going to be upset if we were losing the focus altogether, but I like the idea of connecting it to COVID, because I know we all want to do something about COVID, and this helps to give us a focus on it. Not that it should be the whole thing. And we can also take some of the issues up via some other research, because I assume we still want to do some of the survey work, however we do it, so we can pull some of it into that.
That's right. Yeah. You know what, Ruth? I am hoping to leave 10 minutes at the end to just revisit that, because now we do know our budget, and that's what we talked about.
We don't totally know it, but close.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we have a better sense. I mean, do you want to talk about that at the end? Should we leave time for it? Is there something to talk about?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
I don't see a need to do it now, no. I mean,
Okay.
I think we can talk generally about, assuming there's dollars, what might we do, but not, I don't think we're ready to have a disciplined conversation about what it would look like. Or how
Okay.
much.
All right. All right. I'm going to move on then. Thank you. That gave us 10 minutes that I thought we lost, and now we have it back. Awesome. Okay. Go to the next slide, John Paul.
Just flagging that Marcus is here. So I don't know, Marcus, if you
Oh yeah, no. The only thing I was gonna say to your comment was ditto. I was thinking about like how we reframe this work with the degree to which this crisis is limiting, right, and kind of what we can aspire to and the type of conversations we can have. And so, my thought was like reframing it in the context of COVID. So I didn't really have much to say beyond that. That was just a ditto for me. But hey, everybody.
Hi, Marcus. Thank you for coming.
I know on my screen, I only see 3 faces. So I see John Paul, Ruth, Emily, and it wasn't until I clicked the arrow that I was like, oh wait, Marcus and other people are still with us.
And in the chat, Jessica said she had to hop off until 11.
Gotcha.
So we kind of gained one, lost one. Anyway, I wanted to ground us in this quote. You know, I was also thinking today about how happy I was when I learned that, you know, I had won my election, and that also we had gone from really having very few folks on the state board who had classroom experience to having like something like 74 years worth of classroom experience.
Well,
total.
thanks. Yeah, thanks,
Thanks
Fraser.
to Fraser. I know that's a lot of it, but hey, me, Zach, and Jessica, just for this committee together, we have, I think, like 25 years of experience. So that's pretty substantial, and I just don't want to lose sight of that. I have found myself, actually, that was another thing I realized in this work, that I really vowed not to ever lose sight of that. And now I'm getting an appreciation of how hard it is actually to really keep it in mind, like what it's like to be in the classroom, and how the work that we do, it's so imperative that it connects to that, right? The reality of the complexity and what matters again. So this is a quote I always kept in mind when I was teaching. It's a Irish poet W.B. Yeats. And it is, happiness is neither virtue nor pleasure, nor this thing, nor that, but simply growth. We are happy when we are growing. And I think you can change out growing with learning. I think they're the same thing here. And I think it's so important that whatever we're doing, whatever decisions we're making, this connects to the line in our equity statement, and I think in our mission statement about keeping that one of the things we see as our role is to make sure that learning or education is student-centered. And I think this gets at it for me. I wanted to show you like a 3-minute clip. This is from my school, the Mission Hill School. And this is how we did the 8th grade graduation process. It's a portfolio process where students had to compile their work from 2 years, basically, in every subject and present it to a committee, which included an expert from the field. So it's like it's modeled after a dissertation presentation. And this is, I just want to show you because I think it illustrates this quote actually. And I just want us to keep that in mind, that this is something that's possible as we're thinking about what people are hoping for the fall in terms of what's possible. Because, and this is, okay, before we watch it, I just want you to think about the formats that we have at our disposal right now. Like what, we're proposing is a lot of distance learning. And so this is something that I think actually lends itself to distance learning, is this kind of assessment for student learning that really also incorporates learning and growing in the assessment. So with that, can I click this, John Paul, or do you have to do it? And can you go to 3 minutes, to minute 3? And maybe make it larger.
But as importantly, the instructor or the teacher gets feedback.
A program called Real Studio, which uses Real Basic as a coding of it, is for me at the end of 7th and 8th grade, both what I was capable of. I could take tests, I could write papers and things like that, but I couldn't put together a body of work and then talk about it for 2.5 hours.
This is the teacher talking right now.
For this project, I was trying to figure out if you could make something from memories. I had a group of 5 people watch a video. 3 out of those 5 people, I had them tell the other person lies about what happened in the video. They didn't even realize, but they started to believe what I was telling them.
If there were 1 or 2 things that we could change by the experiment, that would be most important to make it stronger scientifically.
I probably would have waited a longer time before I started asking the questions.
I am a psychologist, and I also teach psychology in university. You have kids in really complex topics, and you can also be able to explain what you did, took all the different steps, and look for different examples.
I'm not sure what's going on right now. Last month or so.
You can stop it, John Paul. Can't really. So sorry, the sound is so crappy. But basically, the middle one, the student who is presenting a project for her, I guess it was literacy, but she chose a psychology project. And the person at the end who was speaking was an expert from the field. She was a professor and a psychologist, and she was, this is a really complex subject you've chosen. And I don't know if you could see the student's face. She was like how meaningful is that for somebody to tell you that? And then the next one switches to the teachers telling the student that he needed to go back and revise. And so this is sort of this 2-year process the students go through, where they have to put work together that they're interested in, that uses the skills they're learning in a real project that they then have to present and defend. and have to go back and revise if it's not up to snuff. But so I just wanted to show that as sort of where I'm coming from, I guess, what I want to keep in mind as we go forward of like what's possible. So go to the next slide. Any questions about that? I'm sorry you couldn't really hear it and get at the gist of. Okay, so so here's some ideas that I had, some proposals I'd like to make. So go ahead to the next slide, John Paul. So if we are ending, right, like if this is kind of the wrap up, and we are going to probably ask Darren and Simone, and maybe we'll do some of this as well, to work on a product. One thought is to just take this list that we're making of resources and best practices, and compile it into a resource that brings together everything. I know folks have said there's already just so much out there, like too much information, but would it be helpful, therefore, to put it all in one place and to say, you know, here's what, for everything from like what the agencies like OSSI is suggesting as resources, to what a school like Capital City, where they do expeditionary learning all year round, how they're planning for this, right? And then that could include, or maybe not, a panel of, again, it could be experts who work in schools to help them expand their well-rounded education, or it could be schools that have made sort of some aspect of well-rounded education, whether it's CEL or, you know, making the curriculum sort of more holistic, like Capital City, you know, to have them speak to this moment of like what they are doing and how they're doing it. Would that be useful? So that is one thought. Should I just go through all of them and then we'll talk about them? Would that be most useful? Yeah, okay, so go to the next one. Okay, so I feel like the next level would be sort of these two are together, gathering more information that would require us to actually like, do interviews, and coming up with common questions that we're asking, and either we would do this ourselves, you know, in our respective wards, and just, you know, gathering a group of principals or a group of teachers, parents, or, you know, actually calling them up and interviewing them. I think it depends on how many we would want, but getting input from folks who are on the ground. So I have some examples. I kind of field tested it a little bit. To go to the next slide. So this is from a Capital City teacher, and I asked what worked well in the spring. And so he said connecting students with students. And he said most administrators are under the impression that we must use technology to connect us to our students, but they are terrified of connecting students to each other. They are rightfully worried about bullying and inappropriate stuff happening. But if we are to create a student-centered approach that is not face-to-face, we have to find ways around this. And then he gave some very practical and specific examples of how he did that. So I just wanted to share that with you, because to give you a sense of like, this is pretty fine-grained. Do we want to go there? You know, and how much of this level of feedback would be helpful and how much would be too much, right? So go to the next slide. So similarly, this is a friend of mine who used to be a teacher, and now he's an education technology specialist. So he actually creates technology for schools. And I asked that question about like, how should we be thinking differently? And I love this. This is just so interesting. So again, I'm like, should we wrap up or should we just be getting into this, right? Is this like something that would be really useful? And he talked about how, people are asking, how can I make sure I can see all my students on the screen? And he's like, that's annoying. It's not the right question. And he's saying, right now they're like, we've been using social media forever and kids are constantly using social media. Why are we not using? He says, it's amazing to me that we have the perfect mechanisms for online expression. We use them every day, but then we don't think to use them with students because I don't know, it feels too simple. So, and he gives like very specific examples of ways that teachers might use social media in their teaching, in this moment. So again, really like interesting, helpful. But, would people read it? I don't know. So, and I think if we are, this is different than asking like stakeholders for their input. This is like very curated in a way. These are people I chose who I knew were thinking in this way, right? So, okay, next slide.
I would just say, Emily, to this point about using social media, I just had a conversation with a team member at Henley, actually, where they were saying they were doing innovative things using Instagram, whether that was Instagram Live or to post things. They were saying it in the sense that obviously they were trying to overcome some barriers and students maybe not having access to devices, but it just seems to kind of align with what the quote from that other teacher, that there are some people trying to be innovative and use these social media platforms.
Right. And so would it be helpful to gather those ideas together? Yeah. So
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it seems like it to me, but I am tentative, and I want to put this to you before I think we need to decide to do this together and how we're going to do it, right? This is also from the same as the last slide, where he's talking about his question is not so much how should we deliver information, how do people learn best online, right? And I think that's just a nice little tweak to the question. And he's saying, I'm studying YouTubers and podcasters and trying to glean what I can from how they engage me. Like, what is it that they do with the medium that is different than you would do live in a classroom, right? And he says they don't do a PowerPoint. They know how to use editing software, they get the right lighting, etc. They let their personalities shine through. So, I mean, I don't know, I guess the other question is, do we want to just, if we went down this route where we're interviewing people, would we just be gathering this level of advice and ideas? And or would we also then want to follow up with recommendations? So this made me think of like, would we maybe want to recommend certain kinds of professional development and find resources or models of certain kinds of professional development and resources that other districts are using? So that would be getting to another level, right? Okay, go to the next slide. Where am I on time? Okay, good. Okay, and then this is sort of, I think, more complicated in some way, which is hearing from stakeholders like parents and students who are the ones experiencing this, learning in this new way, and trying to then, I think that alone is probably not as useful if we don't pair that with recommendations and resources, right? I feel like the previous one that I was sharing, where it's like ideas for innovation, that could stand on its own, right? This, I don't think it could. So that's why I'm putting this at sort of the next level of work. Like, this would be more involved, because it would mean gathering sort of what stakeholders are experiencing and then trying to connect that with the kinds of recommendations and resources we share. So go to the next slide, John Paul. So this is a Ward 7 parent, and in full disclosure, she's actually, I originally interviewed her as a head of an organization, but she spoke to me as a parent. So she's one of the directors at Teaching for Change. So she was responding to my question about what are your concerns and possible solutions. And she said, I think we really need to figure out how to ensure that students are still learning. I'm not talking about standards. I mean, learning about themselves and the world around them, whether it comes from school or not. And I'll just skip ahead then. She's like, Zoom is not working. She has 2 young kids. I think it will be up to people, families, advocates, out of school setting folks, to figure out how we can provide enrichment for them so they are still learning. That word enrichment really stood out to me there, because it made me think about what kind of recommendation would I make based on that. And it did make me think about the like the more camp-like studies that some of the outdoor folks classroom folks are talking about, or like just more non-traditional school settings like museums, and using those kinds of settings, right? So she's not the only one I've heard say this, that like, I just want my kids to be engaged, and I don't think that the traditional schooling thing is going to work. That's the anxiety I'm hearing a lot of parents, and I can echo that. Next slide. This is another parent, Ward 1 parent, and she said, I'm a strong proponent. This is somebody, there's a lot of Ward 1 parents who are strong proponents of the outdoor learning, by the way. So different demographic, maybe, than some of y'all have. But I think the part I highlighted is that she has a son with ADD tendencies, and that they have found that what helps him if he has to do the virtual learning in front of the screen is being able to go outside for a couple hours before that. So, okay, go to the next. Oh, I don't know why I went to this next, but anyway, so I guess this is just, this should be maybe connected with what I was talking about before, but I guess it's also like, do we want to, I think what I was thinking is maybe this is the next level, which is trying to actually take action. So the other stuff is all about making recommendations, providing resources. This is more about trying to make connections where we see them sort of dangling, which is something I'm just sort of experiencing right now, that there are organizations that are offering well-rounded education opportunities, but they've been cut off because of the situation right now. And is there a way to reconnect them? And that's sort of a harder question, I think, but go to the next slide, John Paul. So this is an interview I did with the director of Project Zero. And he was talking about how their work was derailed, both by, first, before COVID, by the loss of the Head Start money, because they did a lot of work in early childhood classrooms, and that work was going to be expanded. They do work with, they do a lot of different things, but this particular project was focused on civics for young children. And they do really cool, and a lot of times site-based work. They do a lot of work where they take the kids to the museums or to sites. And so DCPS was partnering, had a limited partnership and was going to expand it, and now that was derailed. And now with COVID, what he was saying was they were working with several schools across the city, but in Ward 8 in particular, he said they had a really hard time because of the lack of devices and access to Wi-Fi. And he said the way they're thinking about it now is like, maybe they could develop some online programming, but for the families that don't have access, they really want to try to find a way to do this in person. So I'm wondering if we can play a role in that. And finally, I have 1 minute. This is so awesome. That last slide. So this was a slide I presented actually a few days ago with a group of folks who do outdoor learning across the country, and claim that it's successful. And this was just based on what I have heard from my constituents. So this would be one way of sort of trying to encourage those partnerships. So I'm just using this as an example. This is the names of the organizations you see up there. I learned about through the working group I was on with OSSI. These are all partners with OSSI around the environmental learning plan that is derailed. And so these organizations work with schools, but I don't think they know what they're doing, right? And so is there a way to, replace the time that kids would normally be at home isolated in front of a screen with more camp-like settings or more museum-like settings or more garden-like settings, right? And so is that something that we could in some way advocate more than just recommend? Okay, I am done with that. I guess I didn't make time for discussion, so let's just I thought I was doing so good. Let's do what we can. Thoughts?
One, I think all of this is really great. I was going to say, as you were going through it, it kind of harkened back for me about what I thought, right? Our core function as a body is generally, right? Where it's like, we should be the hub for resources for what we know, and then the hub for conversations about what we don't. And so I think when we talk about how we, like what our role is in this space, I do think it's both, right? I think we should be a hub for those resources that are, right, being compiled around the city for what well-rounded education could look like in a setting like this. And I think we should, right, do what we can to really make sure that information gets out and that it's scaled where it can be. And then I think for those tougher questions, or just where educators and school leaders, right, need advice or best practices should be shared, right, we could be the center for those conversations. I was thinking about, right, all of those folks who you talk to who have really good insight about how they're innovating in instruction would be perfect panelists for like a live event like we've done before in different topics, right? As we begin to reopen, how we reimagine public education, what a well-rounded education in particular looks like, what physical education looks like, what arts instruction could look like, what, right, experimental or like community-based learning could look like, even in a social distance setting, right? I just don't think, by and large, those conversations are being had, at least not by a body like ours, right, in a way that people really feel engaged with.
Yeah.
Or that people feel like hopeful and inspired about like the good work that's happening on the ground, right? All we're hearing is about how the systems are really screwing this up for people. And like, but I think we could be a place to say that there's good work happening. We just got to let it happen and build the systems of support that allow it to happen more effectively. So no, I think in terms of the idea about where our next role could be as a part of this committee, I think that is a really good place and a place I'd be really excited about getting into.
So you're saying if we could be sort of we could showcase what is happening and what's possible, that would be a value added.
Yeah, and then I think to your point also, once we learn that information, right, again, making that a part of our bank of resources, right, making that a part of the suggestions or recommendations that we publish more broadly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Others?
Should I go?
Yes.
Or were you trying to get in? No.
Who?
Okay. I'll go. So where to start? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I have some different, somewhat random thoughts from the different slides that we may or may not be able to connect in ways that are useful. So I like the idea of a panel. That's a way of sort of sharing, what's the word that, and showcasing the good things that are going on. I see it kind of as one-off, a very useful one-off. I think, so that's one thing. A second is to go back to the very first slide you have, and I forget how it was framed, but it was very global about identifying, I forget what's going on in distance learning. And it struck me as too global, but that the idea was right. Like if we could identify resources, identify people, identify organizations. What struck me was if we could focus on a couple of very specific aspects of that. For example, one thing that has come up in multiple previous conversations is we've asked the schools when they come back in September to care a lot about SEL. That's clearly really important. It's also really important that in a year when kids lost so much learning and are likely not to have a great learning year upcoming, if we could figure out how to connect the SEL to the learning that we don't want them to lose, right? I mean, so we want them to learn about SEL in terms of how we think of our own emotions and bodies, but also how do we use the desire to create the relationships. This is the way I would talk about it. Part of focusing on SEL is to rebuild relationships and get people to feel they're in relationships. Can we do that in a way that pushes forward the good education we want them to have in these different subjects? So that's one thing, is to connect the SEL with, I call it content, and I realize that feels narrow. I don't know a better word. And then the other one is to identify distance learning stuff that's very connected to current issues. I mean, specifically Black Lives Matter type of things. Putting in front of people in this distance learning environment, we know that it's hard to figure out what to do. And one way to connect everything is to use both the reality of your in-distance learning and the fact that all of this interesting stuff, important stuff is going on around us to educate students. And here's a set of resources, including, I mean, I think the ones that you talk about, right? This is a great time to bring in some of those outside resources. So that was all over the place. Sorry, I thought it was gonna. But I guess I like the idea of us sharing, but I don't think we can mainly be about. I'm just gonna drop it. That's all I have to say for now.
You don't think we can mainly be about what?
No, I like the idea of us sharing at a panel. You know, sort of identifying some coherent. Sort of a set of things going on in the city, or a set of organizations going on in the city that we can celebrate and share at a public meeting and put some focus on that. I like that. I have to say, I worry about imagining ourselves as a place that can become a place we're going to create a long list of resources. I just don't think it's going to have a lot of impact. I think the LEAs are doing that. Maybe Aussie's doing that. I just think if we do that, it does feel redundant, and that it's not going to get a lot of use.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I guess I wasn't thinking of it as a list as much of it as I think the only reason to do that is if it feels more like we are taking all of those lists and putting them in one place for folks, because there are so many things. It's just overwhelming. And maybe if they're in one place, it would be a little less overwhelming. And if they were in one place and categorized in a certain way, that made it easier to access what you needed as a fill in the blank. So that's all I would say to that. I agree with you. But I also think that is the lightest lift for us. And if we did that on a panel, I think that would be sort of the version that I talked about, like we are at closure right now, right? And we can restart, but that would sort of be a concluding project. But I hear you kind of talking about some combination of, yeah, the cell focus and connecting it to academia. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, no, that's right. And sort of like, I'm just looking at your list. I mean, if we asked that question and then asked, the DC Collaborative, Live It, Learn It, these different groups, what they have that fits that category. That could be useful both by collecting things, but by saying, we hope that's a way to do it, right? This is sort of the idea that you should be connecting these things is sort of a bigger idea that we try to push.
I would push back on it a little bit, but maybe I want to hear other people too. Sorry, Jessica, you kind of are coming in at the point of the conversation where
don't change things for me. I know I'm jumping in and out, so I will go with the flow.
I'll just say really quickly that what I was suggesting was either doing something really simple that sort of concludes maybe at the end of the summer, and this is something we can offer, which is like what I just said in response to Ruth, right? Like a gathering of resources and a panel of folks that we choose who we think can show what's possible and what they're doing to respond to this moment, right? Like to carry on with their work. And then yeah.
Just one thing I'd offer in response, because John Paul sent me the slide, so I just read through all the quotes that you got from folks. And one thing I wonder about that I'd love to see as part of that gathering or panel is if folks to change the way they've always done things on a pincushion, right? Like, let's just turn around real fast and do things very differently is hard. But I think that one of the tensions we're seeing come up for well-rounded education and lots of other things is that people are trying to take what we do in classrooms and put it online, as opposed to thinking about what would it look like to do distance learning that met the needs of children and their families and incorporated all the stuff we care about. It can't look like what we do in classrooms. It has to fundamentally look different. And I'd love to push on that as we think about who to gather, like who's figured that out a little bit in terms of, we're not doing worksheets and gathering at 10 a.m. every day to check our worksheets. We're instead asking a bigger, developmentally appropriate, grade level appropriate question and asking students to spend time individually investigating, reading, drawing, writing. And then when we get together, it's the sharing of, what did you learn? What did we learn? Where are we together? What do we think about that? Because that's a practical use of people's time, not like we're all going to sit in a digital classroom and check our answers to our worksheet. I don't mean to be critical of folks who did that, because, right, like, how do you turn around real quickly? But I'd love to showcase folks who got it differently to push the thinking of others who aren't there yet.
Emily, we didn't hear you.
I said that you're responding, even though you weren't here. It's amazing you're responding to one of the options. So yeah, that was sort of the thinking is how, but I guess the question then is, what I was proposing with that, Jessica, was like, do we want to take this work further than just gathering what already exists and actually collect more information, like some of the quotes that you saw on the slides? Do we want to go and interview folks who are doing that work and create a resource that does what you're saying, showcases what innovative people who are thinking innovatively about this new reality, what they are doing or proposing. So that would be more involved. That's all. Zach, were you going to say something?
No, well, yes, it's connected to what you were just saying, that I would advocate for this being more than just a panel, but like, how do we think over the next 8 to 10 months and a series of panels and conversations, maybe geared towards different constituents groups, whether that's educators, parents, students, etc., I disagree with us putting together resources would be redundant because in fact, I don't think there is a state level body that is providing cross-sector resources or insights or findings. And I think that is a gap that we can fill. I think secondly, there's orientation that I think could be more beneficial than not. And so what I'm hearing you say, Emily, what I'm hearing other people say is that we're trying to elevate best practices. I will say, I feel, and this isn't all of our conversations at panels, but as a board, many of our panel conversations are critical or sharing what's not happening or what could be better. And I think this would be a spin and a different approach for us to say, no, actually, let's shine a light on what's happening. And then the last thing I would just say is I think connecting those panel conversations that hopefully would happen over, let's say, between September and March to newsletters and or memos that we would push out to the public to provide resources, insights, collect data could be really valuable to the city and to student learning.
I like that.
And just the last thing I would say, categories or things that I'm thinking about. One is what you all discussed, like how do we improve student learning during COVID-19? Second, how do we effectively track data or student learning? This reminds me of the Ward 7 parents quote, who I think I know who it is, but the Ward 7 parents quote, like how do we track how students are learning? What are our recommendations for that? As well as what are the recommendations that we would even give for students? I can see us promoting our student reps and really having them lead that conversation. They just put together an amazing report, if you will. And so I think we can include some of that work to then pump that out to students, or even if it's just high school students. Just throwing those ideas out there.
Wait, I'm sorry. So what out to students? I missed that last part.
So I was saying, like, thinking about student learning, which would probably be more advantageous for educators than thinking about data tracking, or like how are we as a state or LEAs tracking student learning. I think we could be really value additive in that space. And then I think our student reps just put together a pretty compelling report, some of which touched on this, and how can we talk about recommendations for student engagement, student interest, and really put them in the forefront to have them lead that conversation, wherever that may go.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me of the report. I thought of it and I was actually, yeah, then I forgot. We should be mining that. And the assessment question is a whole nother, that's a whole nother box here.
It doesn't have to be assessments. We could, yeah.
No, what were you gonna say? It could what?
I remember it could be a number of things. I will, I wish we could send pictures via this chat box, but I will send via email. You will remember Josh Boots invited us to a webinar. It was many, many months ago. I actually attended, and one of the things that he highlighted was a data dashboard. I'll send via email, but the dashboard was, and what was so compelling about it, that it was not assessment data. It was not about student learning. It was tracking things like which students are we actually reaching through distance learning? How many home contacts have we had? Things like that, which I think fit with this broader picture that we've been talking about of what learning must be during this time, as well as who are we losing during this period? And so I could see maybe if as a state body we had recommendations like that, that all LEAs should be tracking and reporting which students are being contacted during distant learning could be really helpful. I'll share via email.
Yeah, and I'll share what I was trying to share earlier too, because that does get to assessment. And I was thinking particularly in this moment, how do students show what they've learned? And I think you could, gather together a committee in a Zoom meeting or WebEx or whatever they're using, Teams, and, have students present their work. And it works for young children too. It just looks different. But it's a way of both, it gives students really good skills to present their work and have to answer questions about it. but it also is information for us then about how they're applying their skills. And, you know, we're going to have to think outside of the box at every level, like teaching, learning, assessing, you know, and engagement. So how do we do it? I guess, you know, maybe in the 10 minutes that we have left, any other burning thoughts or questions before we sort of try to wrap up? Okay, so I guess what I'm hearing are kind of different things. But at the minimum, we want to kind of go, as Ruth was saying, to the like have a panel and maybe make some recommendations, to actually having like a series of panels and really showcasing what's possible. Zach, I really liked what you said about sort of this would be a different kind of panel, because it would be really focused on sort of what's working or what's possible. And I hadn't really thought about it that way, but that's true, you know, as opposed to just sort of critiquing what's there. I mean, that would probably be part of it too, but but yeah, I agree. I think that's kind of what is needed right now. And I just think maybe what we should be doing now is asking John Paul and staff sort of what our capacity is in terms of being able to, I mean, I guess panels doesn't take a lot of time and energy beyond figuring out, and this is where we would use the framework, like who would we ask and why? Like, what are we trying to convey? Find out. Are we not then, I didn't really hear folks talking about interest in doing more interviews or gathering more information from direct stakeholders beyond the panels. Is that true? Do we not want to go that route?
I actually appreciated the thought of having those conversations by ward, and really asking all of our colleagues to really lean into this. I mean, the only risk to that is like, you know, we get inconsistent, right, participation. But I think it's a really important opportunity for all of us individually as board members, but also would just, I think, give a really rich source of feedback.
Yeah, and this goes, I think I've said this several times, and I think, you know, we have all at one point or another talked about one of the real advantages that we feel like doesn't get recognized enough is that we are the body that has closest contact with our constituents, and how can we leverage that, right? So this would be a way of leveraging that. It's time consuming, like we would have to commit to that, as you point out, Marcus, that if only 3 of us do it, it doesn't have the same impact as, you know, it doesn't show that, right? So, and I guess maybe what we could do is have a finite number from each, like what would be meaningful, you know, and what would be a meaningful cross section of stakeholders. So that's, yeah.
Sorry, can I introduce yet another wrench into this idea,
Please.
which I love, by the way. I really like having a series and a forum and gathering type thing. I think one of the things that we need to recognize is not necessarily something we can talk about a whole lot on this call, but I do think we need to recognize the fact that it is an election year. And so 4 of our members are potentially going to be focused on re-election right now. And that is going to be challenging during this time. Now,
it's a good point.
We also then, I mean, we could still do some things, right? Like we can still do a lot of things that have not necessarily anything to do with that. I just want to acknowledge the fact that that may become problematic.
Yeah, and you know, I will acknowledge the fact that I am always sort of pumped up when we have these meetings, and then when they're done, I have the best intentions of like, you know, doing a lot of work. And I have, I mean, I've done some work, but I didn't do the work of holding you guys accountable, which I know I said last time. And it's hard. So I think we need to acknowledge that. And that's why I'm presenting it in this way, is like, be honest with yourselves so we can all like know what we're getting into. Do you have the time and energy to do this right now? We're all doing a lot, right? Yeah, Jessica.
So I would say one thing that occurred to me is like the social studies work is a big lift. And so
Yes.
I would find it hard to put a separate meeting on my agenda to engage Ward 6 stakeholders. But I could and would happily reach out to the Ward 6 Public School Parent Organization and the PAVE Ward 6 PLE board to see if we could do a joint August or September meeting on one of their meetings to get that feedback. So if we do this, I think I would leverage the existing groups in the ward and say, hey, would you be willing to dedicate your August or September meeting to talking about this? And if folks are interested in going that route, I would be that's a commitment I could make, that I could ask for that in August or September.
That's a good idea, actually. And I think if we all do it that way, then it comes back somewhat evenly, and we can keep that in mind, that those are certain kinds of parents who go to those meetings, but we all did it. So there's some kind of evenness to it. Yeah, that's interesting. That's good. Ruth.
Yeah, so for me, I don't know if this is as true for others. It's very natural, common, easy to have different kinds of conversations with the parents in the ward. Just because I do newsletters, I put stuff up on listservs, I just get a lot of response, I'm in meetings. But for me to get any kind of systematic feedback from the schools, the teachers, that for me is much, it requires a lot more effort, organization. So that's all. So I feel in a very good place to collect information from the families. But what we're talking about here is, in terms of getting the good practices, is to some extent, I think, more us getting stuff from the schools and the educators.
Yeah. Okay. We are at 4 minutes. It sounds like there's interest. Yeah, go on.
I'll just throw this out quickly, not to add to the staff's workload, but it could be that board members' list is compiling names, contacts, and then having the staff help us in mining those contacts for best practices. Just because what I'm hearing from Jessica, Ruth, and others, and I know it to be true, is that there is a lot going on. And I think there are ways that we can kind of balance the ask as well as the follow-up between board members and staff. Just throwing that out there. So to Ruth's point, if she's finding it difficult, maybe it's like Ruth helps cultivate the list of names and contacts, and then either committee members here reach out, or maybe even staff through a blind email or through phone calls to kind of learn from them.
Right.
It's possible. Like that logistically is possible for the staff to be able to help with. The problem with it is that me sending an email blind to constituents or school is not going to get the same response as you guys doing it. So like we can draft the text, we can help with that type of thing. And I mean, if it's just a matter of you all hitting send, you know, and I think for consistency's sake, that would probably be helpful too.
Yeah.
So there are balances on this.
Yeah, no, a thought I had, Zach, actually, to that point, I'm glad you reminded me, is I had actually asked Darren and Simone to annotate that list that we have so far. And so that we can get a better sense of what all of those organizations do. I think that will be helpful. And then if we have, this is what I was asking you to do earlier, if you have a contact there, that you would be the person to contact them. Otherwise, you know, staff could just as easily contact as we could for the organizations. I do think for the schools, it should be the ward rep who does that. And that we use common questions. So we didn't go over that today, but I think they can be fairly simple, like the ones I was proposing in the slides. And there was one more thought. Zach, you were saying that they could mine those. Yeah, I think that it's a combination. I think if we have connections, we do the mining, and then in terms of gathering, the staff would be the ones to figure out how to put it together into something that was useful. That was my thought. Something that was easily accessible and inviting and all of that. Does that make sense? And is that doable, John Paul? Okay, we are at time. So what I think I will do is sort of try to synthesize what I've heard, and based on that, write a proposal of this is what we could do. And I don't think, I wasn't planning on meeting in August, but maybe we could just communicate, you know, based on the proposal, like communicate, not in real time as Zia suggested. That's so pre-COVID. And we can just, you know, respond to one another in emails or whatever. So
Zach wants to meet.
Zach wants to meet.
Just because I think we're up against time with school coming back online, and it will be helpful, as well as we don't have other meetings like a public meeting.
Well-rounded education cocktail hour.
Fine, that works.
At 11 in the morning?
Yeah, yep.
Okay.
Well, we could do a lot of back and forthing on drafts or whatever, and then decide whether we want to get together to meet. So it could be a way
So
to-
right
I
now,
have a very good Bloody Mary recipe.
we do have a meeting on the agenda for August, on the schedule for August 7th for this committee. So that
Okay.
is the same week as our working session. So we'd have a working session on August 5th and then have the meeting on August 7th, which is,
I would like to propose something actually, which is that we meet sooner than that. Because I think part of the problem here is that we lose steam. And I am really just throwing this out there. I haven't thought about it. Again, I know we're all really busy, but what if this will motivate me to get on this right away, to send you a proposal by early next week, and to maybe meet on Friday to solidify something? I don't know. Oh, we can't, right?
we can, I mean, I can, if we agree to, that we're gonna have a meeting next week, I can get it noticed and we can do that. But, so next week is the 17th.
It's just a thought. I haven't thought it out, but it just seems like we have a bunch of ideas. We are feeling, you know, like they're close in mind and heart, hopefully, and that I think it's better to come to some understanding about what we're doing, sort of in the longer gap.
What about an informal meeting before the 7th, which would probably mean it would be the board members and the staff could join if they want it informally, and then we meet as we were scheduled. Would that?
An informal meeting between, you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
So
Hour.
if there's any more than 3 members on, or 4 members on a call, it's official.
Oh, I
Any
thought
more
it
than,
was 5.
and we are more than 4, yeah.
5 is majority, so it
Got it.
Who's gonna be the designated survivor?
I'll do a proposal and then I won't come to the meeting. No. I don't know. I'll send you something. We're over time now. I want to respect people's time. So let me send out a proposal, which will include a proposal about when to meet next. And you guys can respond.
Okay.
All right. And, okay. And so for the, sorry, Zach, do you want to say anything?
Nope.
Okay. We'll get to the equity framework,
Yes.
promise.
Look out for your emails for next steps and details.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye, all. Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.